I'm Sean Haney, and this is Real Ag on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. Real Ag on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to Real Ag on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. Hopefully you had yourself a great week. We are here for Real Ag on the Weekend to wrap up all things agriculture that happened in this week. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com, and it's great to be with you. If you have any feedback on today's show, maybe some thoughts, some insight, you don't like what you heard, you like what you heard, just all opinions, all welcome here. You can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course, you can call the Real Ag feedback line. It is 855-776-6147. Now, today on the show, we're going to hear from Al Mussel. He's with CAPI. He's one of their policy directors. And Al and I are going to talk about carbon border adjustments. This is something... It has to do with sustainability and the environmental file, but it also applies to trade. And I think you need to be concerned. I think you need to get this on your radar, and we'll hear why on the program. We're also going to hear from Eddie Lemoyne. Now, Eddie is a keynote speaker, travels around the world. Him and I had a chance to discuss the new work environment and what that could mean for industries like agriculture. And we're going to play a portion of the conversation I had with him from our recent Mind Your Farm Business podcast episode. And then I definitely today want to hit, and I want to get your opinions on it. This grain contract and the Saskatchewan judge deciding that a farmer from Saskatchewan owes a grain company, Southwest Terminals, $82,000 for a fine because a flax contract wasn't executed on, and it all had to do with a text conversation involving an emoji, a thumbs up emoji. So we'll break that down, and we'll also try to get your thoughts on it as well. Now, every other Friday on RealAgriculture.com, I get a chance to talk to Ann Wasco of the Gateway Livestock Exchange. And we've been doing this for like over 10 years. Ann is a great speaker, a great beef market analyst. She's been working in the cattle industry for a very long time. Many of you know her very, very well. She's a true dear friend. Ranches down in East End, Saskatchewan as well with her husband, Barry. Now, what Ann and I always try to break down is provide perspectives on what's happening in the trade, what's happening in the cash price market, U.S. and Canada, and the other key items, things like that. This week, I chatted with her, and we were talking about what's happened with cattle prices over the last number of weeks and how we have really been playing a lot of catch-up. And I asked her, this is looking like a pretty decent run right now, a pretty decent turn, as they say in the business, for cattle feeders. And here's what she had to say.
No, there's been a whole bunch of things improve. So much of 2021 and 2022, we talked about the horribly wide basis we saw in Western Canada. And so, basically all of that has been caught up. It didn't all happen in 1 week. It's happened over the last 4 or 5 months. But basically, we've now got fat cattle in Western Canada trading at a premium to the U.S. So talk about going from one extreme to the other. But so that leverage piece has been a big improvement. So like I say, this market has basically marched higher for 26 weeks so far this year. And it had to make up some of that ground. It was well behind the U.S. market. We had catch up to do. And I think, you can say now we've caught up to where we should be trading.
We're starting to get a bit of an indication as far as what some of these feeder cattle could be worth in the fall. Pretty hefty pricing, good pricing, even compared to this past fall of 22. And I think it's good. And if we need a number of years of this, because if we get a number of years of it, that means we're going to attract more people into the cattle industry. That means we are going to start to build that cow herd. And if we start to build the cow herd, because we could be getting some signals here, like if you think back to what we saw at the the last year's Canadian Beef Industry Conference, this year's CattleCon, that was the NCBA meeting back in early February. There is a lot of signals here that there's going to be a good period of years based on supply for the rancher. Now, if we get some rain, that's another variable that's a component of that. So very encouraging stuff. I'm happy for the livestock industry, specifically the cattle industry, because there's been some tough times. It's been rough, and relief in feed costs is a part of that. Not great for some of the farmers out there, but it's some of the relief that the cattle industry needed. Now, if you look at the pork sector, that's under some other challenges. So it's definitely something to be paying attention to. So if you want to hear the whole discussion with myself and Ann Wasco, you can go to RealAgriculture.com. We've got that beef market update there from yesterday. But speaking of the markets, have you been sort of following what's been going on here in the grain and oilseed sector? Corn one really bouncing around, and if you didn't have any trigger contracts in place or price triggers, whatever grain company you're dealing with, they phrase it differently. But it's like what goes up must come down in about a month period here, or like a 3-week period. It's been really, really crazy. The other point is what's been going on in canola, and if you look at November canola, okay, it's erased some of the losses that we saw in Q1, right? Canola has essentially climbed from basically the 31st of May, we're at about 612. Okay. We're sitting now at just under 759. So if you sold early, of course, you got some regret, but we're back to the levels that we saw back in March. Yeah, back in March. So, boy, trying to steer through some of this marketing stuff it is hard. And I'm assuming that a part of the canola jump has something to do with what happened with soybeans and the June 30th report that came out last week. And so for the vegetable oil sector, good news. And we've also got I don't know how you estimate what this canola crop is in Western Canada. Let's be honest about it. It's pretty stagey. It's variable. And as I mentioned last week, I drove really across the province of Saskatchewan in the lower half. And there's a little bit of good, a little bit of not so good, better than last year, better than the year before. Well, everything's better than 2021. Let's be honest about that. But I think we don't really know until those combines start to hit the field. So difficult time for people to figure out what they're going to be doing in terms of their crop marketing. Indeed. Okay. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we are going to hear a conversation that I had with Al Mussel. We're going to talk about carbon border adjustments and what that could mean for the future of agricultural trade. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend, and of course, we are on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit CanolaSchool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
And welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. This week, I was able to attend Alltech 1 Calgary. Very obviously was in Calgary, Alberta. And we broadcasted Real Ag Radio from the event. and had a great time. I saw so many familiar faces as well as met a whole bunch of new people as well. One of the familiar faces I was able to chat with was Al Mussel. Now, he is one of the policy directors at CAPI. And Al and I had quite an unplanned discussion. We kind of riffed for 30 to 40 minutes about a whole bunch of different policy things that are happening in Canada and around the world. You can find the entire discussion by going to RealAgriculture.com. I encourage you to check it out. I'm going to play a portion of our conversation with you where we talk about carbon border adjustments. Now, this is something maybe you've been hearing about, maybe you haven't. I want to get it on your radar. This is essentially where countries will apply a tariff on goods coming into their country that are coming from a country that doesn't have the same environmental standards. There's some people talking about this in a very positive light, and there's others that are concerned. So let's hear the discussion with myself and Al Mussel from the Alltech One conference this week. Hey, there is huge amount of money involved, and this topic is very important to Canadians in general.
Yes.
How we deal with it, though, I think is still the sort of the poof in the air that we haven't necessarily sorted it out.
Right.
Americans don't have a price on pollution. Canada does. It's, we've heard the Conservatives get in. They're going to take away the carbon tax. They're going to probably have some sort of substitute to satisfy Canadians. That's still yet to be determined, or what that actually looks like, or what it's called. So this is stuff that's very, very much in the discussion right now.
Well, and if you go back to the early 1990s, and actually I think I talked to Kelvin about this a few weeks ago. We didn't. So we went into agriculture trade negotiations, and it's remarkable to think about this. We didn't have a way to describe and sort of codify different forms of agricultural protectionism.
Right.
We didn't have that. It all had to be built. So we came out of it in the WTO agreement with export competition, domestic support, and market access. But we had to develop that. And we also didn't have a way to describe the products. Like, we didn't have the harmonized system with all these product codes that describe different cuts of meat, the difference between seed and grains for consumption. We didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
Well, you think about carbon border adjustments. Well, I mean, if we don't have a carbon tax in the future in this country, the Europeans have their system, which they're prepared to put a carbon border adjustments against. Mm-hmm. The U.S. has their system, which is kind of an old-fashioned set regulations and then subsidize companies so that they can comply with the regulations.
Yep.
They've done that, and then say, just for the sake of argument, we don't get rid of our carbon tax. There has to be some form of harmonization between these very different systems. Otherwise, what you're going to get is chaos.
So I am to the camp in carbon border adjustments of chaos. I think it is going to be a mess.
Yep.
Because it is going to be used in the most flimsiest ways to just do whatever you want to do.
Right.
And so, and because we have rules in trade today that take forever to resolve when there's a dispute. So you think about U.S.-Canada TRQ allocations, right? You think about softwood lumber between Canada and the U.S., the Mexico-U.S. GM corn situation not moving very fast. And there's a ton of them. Those are much more, and those are defined.
Yes.
When we talk about the math on who is doing what when it comes to solving the climate crisis, think about what that looks like.
Oh,
Basically, any country can say, I'm the country of Sean, you're the country of Al. I could say, Al, I don't care what you've been doing or how much money you've been spending or what practices have changed. We don't believe you're really committed to saving the planet. Therefore, here's a 30% tax on the corn exports that you're sending to us because we want to protect our own farmers.
Well, or conversely, Sean, over in your country, you've got you've got such and such an uptake of direct seeding. You're going to claim that sequesters X amount of carbon. Well, my scientists have reviewed your protocol, and it's bunk. So, as a result, you're going to get levied, your exports of wheat to my country, and we're going to tax you like this.
It's a mess.
And if we have no underlying framework,
because we won't,
to classify or bring the knowledge of the climate science to bear on these things, countries are free and open to just take shots at one another, and I imagine that they will. So and by the way, biodiversity's coming too.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we tackle that, but one thing that I think is for certain, however complicated carbon is, biodiversity will be that much more complicated.
Carbon border adjustments or carbon tariffs make sense when we think about Canada, India, Canada, China. Where it goes crazy is where it's like Canada and the U.S., Canada and the European Union. This is like a misapplication because some people have really talked about carbon border adjustments in the most positive way, but I think it's like something that's kind of utopian. It's like in a perfect world where, there's like dramatic difference between the environmental compliance between two countries. This is easy to apply and administer, and it'll just make sense, and everybody will just get better.
I have to expect that some of these discussions must surely be going on, and just making the analogy back to the early days in the Doha round. So you had countries that subsidized agriculture, and others that would use regulations of one sort or another. And say, well, oh my gosh, how are we going to sort out? Because some of the regulations have they have subsidy-like effects. So we have to find some way that we can correlate the two of them. And we eventually came up with that. So, if you've got the United States, which is going to use a regulatory standard with subsidy to support compliance, and as it is today, Canada has a carbon tax, then surely we can come up with a way to sort of say, well, we can come up with equivalence, the logic of equivalence and metrics. And I can't imagine that discussion isn't going on, but at this point we don't have it, so we're left to speculate. And it looks like chaos. Well,
the inconsistency of, the current federal government has done a good job of convincing Canadians that the only way that you fight climate change is by having a tax on carbon. Right. Because, many economists will say this is the most efficient way to do it.
And to be fair, that's right. Economists say that this is the most efficient way to do it. I believe that's probably correct.
And so then you're going to accommodate a country like the U.S. that has no price on pollution, but you're going to tell your own citizens that, we can't do it any other way. But it's
So the idea in a regulated system is that the cost is implicit. So, if you run the polluting factory, then you bear the cost of meeting that spec.
Right.
So there's a cost which presumably you pass on to your customers, but it's implicit. It's not explicit like a carbon tax.
Well, I'm predicting chaos.
You're probably pretty safe.
I wish everybody could see Al's face. He's like, yep. That was my conversation with Al Mussel of Cappy. You can hear our entire discussion by going to RealAgriculture.com. And like I said, I'm very concerned about how these carbon border adjustments could be used at 100,000 feet. And from an ideological standpoint, I get it. But there's a dark side to this that is going to lead to a lot of trade disputes that I don't know how we find resolution to them. When we come back on RealAg on the weekend, we are going to hear about the new work environment from Eddie Lemoyne from a recent Mind Your Farm Business episode. You're listening to RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
RealAg Radio is Canada's only daily radio show focused on agriculture. Get expert advice on Agronomic Monday. Tuesdays and Wednesdays will cover a broad range of issues. Thursday we'll hear from farmers across the country on the Farmer Rapid Fire. And we'll wrap things up Fridays with the RealAg Issues panel with Kelvin Hepner and Lindsay Smith. Join us Monday through Friday at 4:30 Eastern. And don't forget about the replay at 7 in the morning on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to RealAgriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Some of you listening out there are going to have staff members. You're going to have a team, people that work on the farm. Maybe you're somebody that does work on a farm and you're listening. Maybe you're somebody that has to deal with other family members. Well, no matter what any of those situations you're in, you're having to deal with this, what some people will call the new work environment. Some of the challenges that go with a tight labor market, different generational expectations, and a number of other variables as well. So in a recent Mind Your Farm Business episode, it's a great podcast. Go to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or just search up Mind Your Farm Business on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And we talk about farm management issues. On a recent episode, I was joined by keynote speaker Eddie Lemoyne. And Eddie talks about this new work environment. I'm going to play you a clip here of our discussion, and then we'll chat.
You know, the pandemic had pushed a couple buttons that brought us to a place we were probably going to be 6 or 7 years from now, but it accelerated the whole process. And I think people are really struggling to adjust to what the new reality is. And I think to some degree, people are thinking, well, this is going to be over. You know, we'll just wait a little while and things will open back up and there'll be an opportunity to hire people. But the skill shortage we're kind of at the beginning of, 5 or 6 years of some real pain around attracting, retaining, and keeping employees.
Yeah. And added to that, if we think about it we hear about the trades a lot in agriculture, on the farm or the ranch, if somebody was going to go into trade school, that's the kind of person, someone that's tactical with their hands, they're practical, they like being outdoors. They like, really feeling a sense of accomplishment in the physical side of things. For a long time, we encouraged a lot of people to not enter fields like that and enter more of professional or white collar kind of occupations. That's also, I think, one of the variables here that's really biting us. Yeah.
In fact, if we look at the trade, some of the highest paying jobs in the country right now are in the trade side of things. In a recent speech I gave in an industry that caters mostly to heavy equipment operators, they're the second highest paid industry in that particular province, next to the mining industry. So trades are really a great place to send people now to have a good long career, but with a very high income as well.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the pressures that people are dealing with? Is it harder right now to find people, or is the harder part keeping them? Talk about how this workplace is changing.
So it is definitely harder to find people right now, and the numbers don't lie. I mean, if you look at it, like in Canada right now, we've gone down as low as 4.9% jobless rate during the kind of the top of the pandemic. If we're hovering around 5.1 or 5.2%, that's like super, super low. But because 5% is considered fully employed. But if you look at other G7 countries like south of the border with the US, where they would hover down around 3%, what happened during the pandemic is that people realized they could work from home. So a lot of industries will say, well, that doesn't apply to me because my people either turn a wrench or they drive a truck or something like that. But the reality is it really applies to everyone because it put pressure on everyone's employees. And, to give simple examples, the hospitality industry during the pandemic lost 237,000 people that moved into other industries. So they would traditionally be people that would have to go to work, but opportunities kind of arose for them to go into other industries and work maybe remotely or a hybrid work environment. So even when industries say it doesn't impact me, it still impacts you because you now have to work really hard, not just to keep your employees in your businesses, but to keep people in your industry so that they don't go off into another industry and then make it even more difficult in the next round when you're trying to hire people, maybe for the next season or something.
Yeah, and a good example here, which I think is a little bit different, it was in agriculture, especially in Alberta. There was a long time a struggle to keep people in the industry because they could move over to the energy sector, do maybe somewhat similar stuff, but make a lot more money. Yes. And agriculture could never compete with the energy industry, but that's a good example of trying to keep people in your industry.
That's right.
This example, it's not about the money necessarily. It's about the structure of the workday and what's important to the person. That's even more complicated.
That's right. And I think you have to kind of look beyond it's, like work from home or not work from home. I mean, that's obviously part of it, but it's the flexibility that people look for in the workplace now, flexible hours, come in later, go home earlier, work 4 days a week, have 3 days off. People have to be a little bit open to new ways of attracting people to come in and work. We seem to get hung up on this work from home scenario, but that's only part of the challenge that's happening right now. What happens when you take the numbers and make them as tight as they are right now? Opportunities become available for people to move around. And recently I was talking to a CEO of a large association and she said, well, what are we going to do? And there's really two answers for any industry. One is, three kind of. One is you have to take people from other industries. So you have to make your industry more attractive to get people to go from other industries into your industries. And that could be flexibility, it could be pay, it could be making the industry more fun to work in. The other thing is you've got to get way out in front of this. So like I would suggest to get to the grade 8s and get the grade 8s interested in going into agriculture before they even get to high school, before everyone else gets to them, and try and convince them. And then the other thing, and it's the only other thing we could do right now, is more automation, more technology that we can implement into any given industry so that your reliance on the workforce is going to be a little bit less than it would have been in the past.
Okay.
But I mean,
in your industry. What about the fourth? Immigration.
Well, when I think of attracting people, I think of attracting people, whether it's immigration or not.
Okay.
So in your industry, one of the things that you would look for, one is people that you're trying to attract from other countries. So the competition right now for immigration is all the G7 countries. Like some sectors, and I might get these numbers wrong, but like take nursing, for example. We're seeing Canada recruit nurses from other countries, but there's about a 4.5 million nurse shortage worldwide. So as you attract people in your industries from other G7 countries or other countries that may be really high in the agricultural sector, you're now competing against all those other countries as well to attract people. So obviously there's two you're going to try and attract. One would be people that would move here and stay here, and we would integrate their families and they would grow up in here and contribute to the long-term growth of the country. The other is going to be temporary foreign workers, but even temporary foreign workers now are going to become more difficult to get because you have to compete against other countries that are looking for those same resources. Canada's not the only country that's feeling this, and that's what makes this so different now is that all the G7 countries are struggling to find people.
That was Eddie Lemoyne in a recent discussion we had on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. Encourage you to go to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or check out the Mind Your Farm Business podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You know, one of the things that Eddie mentions there is need to connect with, he mentions grade 8. And this is where ag in the classroom is just so critical. To make those connections, open those doors in non-traditional agricultural markets to expose people to all the different opportunities that are in the industry of agriculture. It's just absolutely, absolutely critical. The other thing that Eddie points out is not just about the money. There's a whole bunch of other things about the job and the structure of the job that lead somebody to have that peak utility as they reflect on what they're doing on a daily basis. Really encourage you to check out this episode and send me your feedback, shaney@realagriculture.com. Speaking of feedback, I want yours on something that happened in Saskatchewan here recently involving a grain contract and an emoji. I want your thoughts right after this. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Now, I have to admit, on this next topic, when I first heard about this, I was like, oh man, how does this happen? How does somebody send somebody else they're texting with a thumbs up emoji and not think that that doesn't signal agreeing? Then I read more into the story, and I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. And this is a situation I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Is you've been communicating with a supplier or a buyer via text message. This is happening a lot more now. Instead of a phone call, people are using things like WhatsApp or just regular text messaging all the time. So in Saskatchewan, a judge, and I'm reading from the story from the Globe and Mail, a Saskatchewan judge says an emoji can amount to a contractual agreement in order to farmer to pay more than $82,000 for not delivering product to a grain buyer after responding to a text message with a thumbs up image. We all know those emojis. They're quick, they're simple, but they can't be misinterpreted. Story continues. The Court of King's Bench decision. Notice it doesn't say Queen anymore. It's Court of King's Bench, right? Because we've got a king now. Okay, anyway. The Court of King's Bench decision said a grain buyer with Southwest Terminal sent a text to farmers in March of 21 saying that the company was looking to buy 86 tons of flax for $17 per bushel to be delivered in the fall. So the buyer at the grain company talked to the farmer on the phone and texted a picture of a contract to deliver the flax in November. Okay? And added in the text, please confirm flax contract. The farmer texted back a thumbs up emoji, But when November came around, the flax was not delivered and prices for the crop had increased. Uh-oh. So the grain buyer said the emoji amounted to an agreement because he had texted numerous contracts to the farmer who previously confirmed through text message and always fulfilled the order. But the farmer argued that the emoji indicated only that he'd received the contract in the text message. Farmer was quoted in the affidavit as saying, "I deny that he accepted the thumbs up emoji as a digital signature of the incomplete contract. I did not have time to review the flax contract and merely wanted to indicate that I did receive his text message." Justice Timothy Keene said in his June decision that the thumbs up emoji did meet signature requirements and therefore the farmer breached his contract. Fascinating. So I think this is very complicated. I think you can argue both sides of this, to be quite honest with you. I guess there's a lesson here, and a really expensive lesson for the farmer that got caught up in this. But we have this huge propensity now to use, like, have you ever texted with your kids? It's a whole bunch of acronyms and emojis. Half the time I got to look up what those acronyms mean. But they can be misinterpreted. And so whatever the intent was here, of either side, or what how things were interpreted, it really does add to confusion. So I don't think the lesson here is don't do business through text message. I think the lesson here is maybe don't use messaging like through emojis that could be misinterpreted and used against you when it comes to working out some of the difference. And in this case, the difference was, did I actually agree to the contract or not? What kind of surprises me, or I guess what I wonder is, and this grain buyers with Southwest Terminals, is that in their standard practices that they can accept an emoji as a signature? Because usually it's like, print it out, sign it, scan it, send it back. That is not what happened here. And there's also the sake of, hey, I know you're busy. Just tell me yes or no. We'll fill out the paperwork later. That didn't seem to happen in this case either. And so there's this balance between trying to accommodate people and, what's convenient versus what needs to be done in order to say that, hey, this is an agreed upon contract. Many of you are listening saying probably, hey, this is, crap. This is nuts. How is this actually the case? I know exactly what the farmer was thinking. It's very true. It's very true. I can totally see the farmer's argument. One, if you want to be objective, can also see on the grain company side here, potentially, in terms of like, hey, let me know what you think about that flax contract. Thumbs up. But think about that. That thumbs up could mean, yes, I want to do it. It could mean, yeah, I'll have a look at it. It could be, hey, thumbs up, I'll get back to you. Think of all the ways that thumbs up emoji can be misinterpreted and lead to misunderstanding. And in this case, a pretty significant misunderstanding. So what are your thoughts on this? What do you think about the judgment? What do you think that this is do you think the judge was fair? Will this change the way that you communicate through text message going forward? Maybe it doesn't. Are you using text message as a way to do business? I think a lot of you are. And believe me, in some ways, if we're not careful with communication, phone calls can be just as brutal, right? There's bad connections. There's just a lot of communications. The trouble is so much of our communications now have become short and concise and not very thorough. And that's a human nature kind of thing. What if the farmer had sent a thumbs down emoji? Right? In that case, it would be probably less misinterpreted because it's like, hey, no, I think your contract stinks. But because it's a thumbs up, there's a whole bunch of different ways that could go. There's probably a lot of emojis you could use. There's probably some emojis you could use to describe this ruling. But I think it's something that we have to really pay attention to and understand when we're sending those messages and we're using maybe graphics and not words, there's ways that this can be misinterpreted. So I think this is a huge heads up. It's something to definitely be paying attention to going forward. Indeed, and because the price went a certain way, that's the other part of it. What if the price had gone down? Does this change? All things to think about. Send me your feedback, shaney@realagriculture.com, or the RealAg feedback line is 855-776-6147. Hope everybody has themselves a great rest of your weekend. Thanks so much for joining us here, 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. And this is Sean Haney for RealAg on the Weekend. Cheers, everybody.